My brother called me his biggest supporter at his wedding. I gave a toast. I smiled. I meant every word. 3 years later, I was the one who handed the file to the police. My mother didn't speak to me for 2 years. My father told me I had destroyed the family. My aunts stopped inviting me to things. I sat with that alone. And I would do it again. The first time I noticed something, I almost talked myself out of it. I was visiting my brother Daniel's house on a Sunday afternoon. He had a daughter by then, his wife Sana's from her first marriage. Her name was Hira. She was 9 years old. Smart kid. Used to correct adults when they mispronounced her name. I was in the kitchen with Sana making tea. Hira was in the living room with Daniel, watching something on his tablet. I walked in to get my phone charger. Hira moved to the other side of the sofa. Not dramatically. Not with a word. Just quietly slid to the far cushion, closer to the arm, further from him. Daniel laughed about something on the screen and she gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I picked up my charger. I walked back to the kitchen. Sana asked if I wanted sugar. I said yes. But something in my chest hadn't moved. It was sitting there, still and heavy, like a stone that had just been placed. I told myself I was imagining it. Kids are moody. Kids get quiet. She was probably tired, or they'd had a disagreement earlier, or she simply didn't feel like sitting close to anyone that afternoon. I told myself a lot of things over the next few months. But I started noticing more. The way Hira never ran to greet Daniel at the door the way she used to when she was younger. The way she asked me once, out of nowhere, if I knew how to lock a phone. Not just set a passcode, lock it. So no one could open it. I showed her. She didn't explain why she was asking. I didn't push. The way she started spending more time in her room when I visited. The way she was always watching the door. I noticed that Daniel had started taking her to school some mornings even though her school was in the opposite direction from his office. I noticed that Hira had stopped talking about her friends. I noticed that when I asked her how things were going, she would give me an answer that was technically a sentence but wasn't really a response. Like she'd learned to speak in a way that gave nothing away. She was 9. Then she was 10. I told my mother what I was observing. Not accusations. I didn't have those yet. I told her I was worried. I told her something felt off. She listened. Then she told me Hira was a sensitive child. That she'd always been a little withdrawn. That Daniel was a wonderful stepfather and I should be careful about saying things I couldn't take back. She said, "You've always been dramatic about things." I sat with that for a long time. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was projecting something that wasn't there. Maybe I was seeing patterns because I wanted to feel important, or needed something to worry about, or didn't fully understand what a blended family looked like from the inside. I went home that night and I sat in my flat and I tried to talk myself back to normal. But the stone in my chest hadn't moved. A few weeks later I was helping Sana clean out a storage cupboard. Daniel was at work. Hira was at school. I found a small notebook wedged between 2 showboxes on the top shelf. The kind kids use for school. Lined paper. Pink cover. It had fallen behind a box and it was dusty, like it had been up there for a long time. I almost left it. It wasn't mine. Then I saw the first line on the open page. I won't write what it said here. I've never written it out since. I've only read it twice, once that day and once when I gave it to the investigator. What I will say is this. A 10-year-old child had written, in careful handwriting, something she was clearly too afraid to say out loud. Something specific. Something that couldn't be misread. Something she had hidden somewhere she thought no one would find. I stood in that cupboard for a long time. My hands were completely still. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me. I put the notebook exactly where I found it. I finished helping Sana with the cupboard. I drank the tea she made. I drove home. That's when I realized something was very wrong. I didn't call anyone that night. I didn't search things online. I didn't make any sudden moves. I had spent months second-guessing what I felt. Now I had something real. And the first thing I understood, without anyone telling me, was that if I reacted badly, I could make everything worse. If Daniel found out I knew, that notebook would disappear. If Sana found out before she was ready, she might deny it to protect her own marriage. If my family found out, they would close ranks around him before I could do anything. I had one advantage. No one knew what I had seen. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. I want to be clear about something before I describe what came next. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I don't look for problems. I don't assume the worst. I had spent the better part of a year convincing myself I was wrong about my own brother. What changed wasn't my instinct. What changed was the evidence. And once it started appearing, it didn't stop. The first thing I did was speak to someone outside the family. I had a colleague, I'll call her Nadia, who had worked for several years in child welfare before she moved into our field. We weren't close friends, but I trusted her judgment. I trusted that she would be honest with me even if what she said was uncomfortable. I told her what I had observed over the past several months. I didn't show her the notebook. I described it. She didn't flinch. She didn't tell me I was being dramatic. She asked me 3 questions, quietly and carefully. Then she told me to stop doing anything on my own. She gave me the name of a child protection unit and told me to document everything I had seen, dates, times, specific behaviors, before I did anything else. She said, write it down tonight, while it's fresh. Don't talk to anyone in the family yet. Don't confront him. I went home and I wrote for 3 hours. 14 months of observations. Dates I remembered. Conversations I could quote closely. Moments I had almost dismissed. It filled 11 pages. 2 weeks later, I was at Daniel's house again for a family dinner. Normal occasion. No reason anyone would be guarded. After we ate, Daniel took a phone call in the garden. I offered to help Sana in the kitchen. Hira was sitting at the dining table, still, drawing something in a sketchbook. At some point Sana went upstairs to check on something. I was alone with Hira for about 4 minutes. I didn't plan what I said. I sat down across from her and I looked at what she was drawing, a house, trees, a sky with no sun in it, and I said, very quietly, that she could always talk to me. About anything. That I wouldn't repeat things unless I thought she was in danger. That I was on her side, no matter what. She kept drawing. Then she said, without looking up, he takes my phone at night. I didn't react visibly. I kept my voice level. I asked her what she meant. She said he told her it was to make sure she was sleeping. That he came into her room after her mother was asleep. She said it had been happening for over a year. She said this the way a child says something they have practiced saying quietly to themselves many times. Without tears. Without drama. Like a fact they have learned to carry. Then Sana came back downstairs and Hira turned the page in her sketchbook and started drawing something new. I drove home that night with my hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel the entire way. I did not cry until I was inside my flat with the door closed. I allowed myself 20 minutes. Then I stopped. The documentation I had wasn't enough on its own. Written observations and a child's verbal statement to a family member. I understood, from what Nadia had told me, that this alone could be challenged, dismissed, or used against Hira if Daniel hired the right lawyer. I needed something that existed outside of my memory and his denial. I went back to the notebook. I had been careful not to move it. When I returned to the house the following weekend, another routine visit, nothing unusual, I found it exactly where it had been. Wedged behind the showboxes. Still dusty on the edges. This time I photographed every page with my phone. Then I replaced it precisely as I found it. I transferred the photographs that same night to an encrypted folder. I emailed copies to a private address I had created only for this purpose. I printed a physical copy and sealed it in an envelope that I kept at my office, inside a locked drawer. 3 separate locations. None of them at my home. The next piece came from a direction I hadn't expected. Daniel used a shared family tablet, one of those devices that had been passed around over the years, used by different people for different things. It still had several accounts linked to it, including an old one of mine. He had asked me, about a year earlier, if I still used it. I told him no. I hadn't thought about it since. But because my account was still active on the device, certain synced notifications were still arriving in my email. Most of them were meaningless. App updates. System alerts. In the 4th week after Hira spoke to me, I received a synced alert from a messaging application. A notification preview. 7 words, visible before I had opened anything. I will not write those 7 words here. What I will say is that they were not sent to a family member. They were not sent to a friend. The recipient's display name was a nickname. The kind you give someone young. I screenshot the notification. I saved it in the encrypted folder. I added it to the envelope. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time and I thought about my brother at his wedding, and the toast I had given, and how much I had meant every word. I thought about calling him that night. I thought about going to his house. I thought about telling Sana everything immediately. I thought about a lot of things I didn't do. Because I understood something clearly by then. If I moved too fast, he would know. He would prepare. He would find the notebook, delete the account, build a version of events where I was unstable, obsessed, a sibling with a grudge. He had already heard me raise concerns once, through my mother, and he had done nothing except smile at the next family dinner and ask me how work was going. He wasn't afraid of me. That needed to stay exactly the way it was. Confronting them would have ruined everything. There is a particular kind of stillness that comes over you when you stop being afraid and start being deliberate. I had been afraid for months. Afraid I was wrong. Afraid of what it meant if I was right. Afraid of my family, of the confrontation, of the word that sat at the center of all of this that I still hadn't fully let myself say out loud. But somewhere between photographing that notebook and reading those 7 words on my screen, the fear finished. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was focus. I contacted a lawyer first. Not a family lawyer. Not someone who handled divorces or property disputes. I found a firm that specifically handled child protection cases. I had read about them through Nadia, who had worked alongside them years earlier. I sent an email on a Tuesday evening. By Thursday morning I was sitting in a small, quiet office across from a woman I'll call Advocate Zara. She had short hair, glasses, and the manner of someone who had heard very difficult things for a very long time and had decided that the best response to difficult things was precision. She listened to everything without interrupting. Then she asked me to walk through the timeline again, slowly. I had brought printed copies of my 11 pages of documentation. The photographs of the notebook. The screenshot of the notification. She looked at each one carefully. She didn't react dramatically to any of it. She made notes. At the end she told me 3 things. First, what I had was more than most people brought her at this stage. Second, it was not yet enough to guarantee a prosecution, but it was enough to initiate a formal investigation. Third, from this point forward, I was not to approach Daniel, Sana, or Hira directly. Everything needed to go through the proper process. She said, "Your job right now is to protect what you have and stay completely calm." I told her I could do that. What followed was 22 days of the most disciplined silence I have ever maintained. I attended 2 more family gatherings during that period. One was a cousin's birthday. One was a Sunday lunch at my parents' house. Daniel was at both. I smiled. I asked about his work. I ate the food. I helped clear the dishes. He had no idea. My mother made a comment at the Sunday lunch about how nice it was that the family was all together. She looked at both of us when she said it. I agreed with her. Daniel poured me tea without being asked. He remembered I didn't take sugar. I thanked him. During those 22 days, Advocate Zara was moving carefully on her end. She had connected with the child protection unit Nadia had originally mentioned. A formal referral had been made. A specialist investigator, someone trained specifically in cases involving children, had been assigned. I was interviewed formally. A recorded session, structured questions, nothing like a casual conversation. I gave my statement exactly as I had written it. I handed over every copy of every piece of documentation. The investigator told me they would need to speak to Hira, but that this had to be done in a controlled environment, by trained professionals, without any warning given to the household in advance. I asked how long. She said, as long as it takes to do this correctly. In the third week, something happened that I hadn't planned for. My mother called me. Not about Daniel. Not about any of it. She called because she had noticed I seemed quieter than usual at the Sunday lunch and she wanted to check on me. This is the part that stays with me. She was being kind. She was being the version of my mother that I had always loved, attentive, warm, noticing small things. And I had to sit with the phone pressed to my ear and tell her I was fine. A little tired from work. Nothing serious. She told me to eat properly and sleep enough. I told her I would. I hung up and I sat in my car in a car park for about 10 minutes, very still. I wasn't angry at her. I want to be clear about that. She didn't know what I knew. She had dismissed my concerns months earlier because she couldn't let herself believe they were real. That is a human response. A painful one, but human. What I felt sitting in that car park was something closer to grief. For her. For what was coming. For the version of our family that was about to stop existing. On day 19, the investigator called me. She told me they had completed their preliminary review of the documentation. They had conducted a background check and found something I hadn't known, a previous complaint. Different city. Filed but not pursued. The woman who had filed it had withdrawn her statement. The investigator's voice was measured when she told me this. Professional. But I understood what it meant. Hira was not the beginning. She was just the first one he hadn't been careful enough with. On day 22, I received a message from Advocate Zara. 3 sentences. The formal interview with the child is scheduled. Authorities will be present. Please be available by phone tomorrow afternoon. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the table. I made dinner. I watched something ordinary on television. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. I had done everything I could do. Now it was no longer in my hands. The next morning I went to work. I answered emails. I had a meeting about something entirely unrelated to any of this. I drank 2 cups of coffee and I ate lunch at my desk. Daniel, at that same moment, was almost certainly doing the same. Going through his day. Feeling safe. Feeling like the version of himself he had constructed so carefully. The good husband, the involved stepfather, the brother who remembered you didn't take sugar. He had no reason to think anything was coming. He had no reason to believe that the sister who had smiled at him over Sunday lunch, who had let him pour her tea, who had said nothing for over a year, had spent the last 3 weeks building something he couldn't dismantle. He thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The call came at 2:47 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock without meaning to, the way you watch something when you're trying to convince yourself you aren't watching it. It was Advocate Zara. Her voice was the same as it always was, measured, clear, no unnecessary words. She told me the interview with Hira had been completed that morning. That Hira had spoken. That what she disclosed was consistent, detailed, and corroborated by the documentation I had provided. That the investigator had enough to move forward. She told me authorities would be visiting Daniel's home that evening. She asked if I was all right. I told her yes. I sat at my desk for a few minutes after the call ended. My screen was still open on the email I had been drafting before she rang. Something about a project deadline. Completely ordinary. I saved the draft. I closed my laptop. I told my supervisor I needed to leave early. I didn't go to the house. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect that moment. The confrontation at the door, the look on his face, the satisfaction of being there when everything collapsed. I wasn't there. I had been advised not to be, and I agreed with that advice. My presence would have complicated things. Made it easier for him to make the story about me, about a family dispute, a sibling with an agenda, personal history being weaponized. So instead I drove to a park near my flat and I sat on a bench. It was an ordinary evening. People walking dogs. A child on a bicycle with stabilizers, wobbling slightly, concentrating hard. The sky doing what early evening skies do, turning slowly from pale blue to something warmer. Somewhere across the city, officers were knocking on my brother's door. I sat very still and I let it happen without me. Advocate Zara called again at 6:15. Daniel had been taken in for questioning. The device containing the messaging application had been seized. The notebook, still exactly where Hira had hidden it, had been recovered as physical evidence. Sana had been informed. A family support worker was with her. Hira was safe. Those were the two words that mattered most, and Zara said them at the end, quietly, like she understood that everything else was secondary to them. Hira was safe. My family found out that night. My mother called at 7:30. I let it ring. She called again at 7:44. I let it ring again. She called a third time and I answered. She was not calm. She was not the warm, attentive version of herself from the Sunday phone call. She was frightened and she was angry, and the anger was pointed directly at me. She said I had gone to strangers instead of coming to the family. She said I had destroyed Daniel's life over suspicions. She said I should have talked to her first, talked to my father, given them a chance to handle it internally. I let her finish. Then I said, very quietly, that there was a 10-year-old girl who had been writing things in a notebook that she hid on a shelf because she had no other way to say them. That she had told me, in 4 minutes while her mother was upstairs, something no child should have to say. That there was a previous complaint. That Hira was not the first. Silence. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry for the pain this was causing her. And then I told her that if I had come to the family first, the notebook would be gone by morning. I hung up gently. The weeks that followed were not clean or simple. I won't pretend otherwise. My father called once and said things I won't repeat here. 2 aunts stopped responding to my messages. A family group chat I had been part of for years went quiet in a way that made it clear I had been removed from it. My mother did not speak to me for 7 months. I went to work. I came home. I called Nadia sometimes, just to talk to someone who understood the full picture. I saw my own therapist every 2 weeks. I ate properly and I slept enough, the way my mother had told me to, even when she wasn't speaking to me. I did not collapse. I did not regret. The case moved through the system slowly, the way these things do. There were delays. There were interviews and counter-interviews and legal processes that I wasn't always kept informed of. There were moments when I wondered if anything would actually happen, if the machinery of justice would find some procedural gap and let everything fall through it. But the evidence held. The notebook. The photographs. The messaging records recovered from the seized device, which turned out to be far more extensive than those 7 words I had seen. The previous complaint, reopened. And Hira's own testimony, given again in a formal setting, to trained professionals, consistent and clear. Daniel was charged 14 months after that evening. He did not contest the evidence. His lawyer negotiated a plea before trial. He was sentenced. I did not attend the sentencing. I read the outcome in a message from Advocate Zara, 2 lines long, factual and final. I saved the message. I haven't deleted it. The title of this story mentions 7 others. Here is what that means. After the case became known, in the way these things quietly circulate through communities even when no names are published, 2 women contacted Advocate Zara's firm independently. Both had encountered Daniel in different contexts over the years. Both had been dismissed or had withdrawn before. They gave statements. Then, through the investigation that followed, 5 more were identified. Different ages. Different circumstances. Different years. 7 people who had carried something alone. 7 people who had been, in various ways, not believed, or not supported, or simply too afraid to stay in the process long enough for it to matter. I think about them more than I think about Daniel. I think about what it costs a person to come forward. The weight of it. The way the people who should protect you sometimes become the ones you have to protect yourself from. I think about Hira, who hid a notebook on a shelf because she didn't know what else to do. She knew someone might find it someday. I think she hoped someone would. My mother called me on a Wednesday evening, 7 months after she had stopped speaking to me. She didn't apologize directly. That's not how she does things. What she said was that she had been speaking to the family support worker, the one assigned to Sana, and that she understood more now than she had before. She asked if I would come for dinner on Sunday. I said yes. We didn't talk about Daniel at that dinner. We talked about ordinary things. She made food I liked. My father was quiet, but he was there. It wasn't repaired. I won't say that. But it was a beginning. Hira is doing better. I know this through Sana, who messages me sometimes. Not often. But enough to know that Hira is in a good school, has a friend she talks about frequently, has started drawing again. Proper drawings now, with color, with sunlight in the sky. I haven't seen her since everything happened. When she's ready, if she's ever ready, I'll be there. Until then I keep my distance and I let her heal on her own terms. That's all I can do. That's enough. People ask me sometimes, not many people know the full story, but the ones who do, they ask if I feel vindicated. If I feel like justice was served. If I feel like I won. I don't think about it in those terms. What I feel is something quieter than any of those words. I feel like a child who hid something on a shelf was found. I feel like 7 people who thought no one was listening were finally heard. I feel like I did the only thing that made sense, slowly and carefully and without losing myself in it. And I feel, underneath all of it, the particular weight of knowing who my brother actually was, and understanding that I will carry that knowledge for the rest of my life, regardless of sentences or verdicts or family dinners. Some things don't resolve. They just become part of you. You learn to live around them. That night, everything was quiet.